Having those in the studio like change how you write? Did it inform you or like generate a
Oh,
different resonance for you creatively?
absolutely. Yeah. Because so what was I doing before? I like had my toy synths and then I had soft synths. Like but I didn't really know how to use them too much because I wasn't like super empowered, I think, on the computer at that point. So I like, I was using FM8 and just kind of like tripping and stumbling around in there and and then
Tripping
actually
physically or psychedelically?
no, physically,
Okay,
just like sort of like
you're like
this
just gonna
knob
drop a tab of
does.
acid and mess around on FM8, and it's
Yeah,
like,
okay, that sounds fun. I but I actually my probably my most iconic bass sound, which is from my song
Mhm.
Kites, is a garage band synth
Amazing.
that I just tweaked the knobs on it. And then obviously it was brought it to the studio, sent it through some nice equipment, right, to beef it up. But the sound, it's so to me it was really like you don't need expensive stuff. You just need a good ear to move it around. Um, but then when I did get sort of like the state of the art gear, it really opened up a totally different way of writing where it was just like, okay, I can make like album ready sounds before I go to the studio. Because usually I'd mock up these elaborate demos and then just recreate them sort of like paint by numbers in the studio, which was not very fun, because it was just like, I have the sound, it's just recorded poorly. So now I have to do it. But now I'm like, I can record my demos properly and well. And then when I get into the studio, fly those tracks in and then have fun.
Right. So you're
And then like with the
building on
tools that
stuff.
I don't have, like all these awesome Ampeg amps and like weird 50s amps with reverb in them, it's like, or a grand piano. And then I think as technology has progressed, soft synth wise, and like acoustic emulator instruments, it just opens up the possibilities where I had an album or an EP 2 years ago that was all piano, which I never would have done if I didn't have, I eventually went into a studio and recorded it on a piano, but writing the demos with the soft synths, like contact pianos, I just like, I never would have written those songs, and it would be a totally different song if I wrote it on synth.
Yeah.
So it's like the tools for me very much inform the way I write. Like that's pretty much what it's about.
And when you're writing the musical side, do you tend to, is it like you just come into the studio and say, I'm going to make something and then see what falls onto your fingers, or do you walk in and you have like the melody is in your brain and then you're flashing? Do you know what I mean? How do you interact like your brain and technology?
Well, I almost never go in with an idea. I think I just like come into this room and I just start playing, like messing around, like playing like a child in a sandbox. Like I'm just like, that's fun. And then once I hit something that I really, you get that spark and that like jolt of adrenaline, and then you're like, woo, record that. And then you're like, here we go, Mike, it's happening again, and you're just like, don't fall off. And then it's kind of like, yeah. And then I just start building from there. But every now and then a melody will pop into my head and I'll record it into my phone, and then I'll go back and then work on that. That's pretty rewarding too.
Did you go through a phase like early on, like when you would try to visualize songs in my head? Like I remember filling up notebooks when I was like in my early 20s in London, when I was out of the studio going, and the beat will do this. I was like trying to do all like these kind of like systems of notation, and like could never ever translate them into anything meaningful.
Yes, absolutely. Because I'd be in class or something, and I'd hear a melody, and back then I thought ideas were really like precious, like this might be the only good idea you ever have. And so I was like, okay, I have to figure out how to write this melody down, but I don't have perfect pitch. So there was like a series of like dots and dashes that I would use to be like up one from here, down two. And I don't think I ever recovered one of those songs.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? I think I like now it's just much more like, oh, there's a cool song playing on like Universe FM or something like that, and it's like you just kind of enjoy it. But yeah.
Universe FM.
Yeah.
That's great.
Or when, come into the studio going like, it goes like this, and the first sound you bring up isn't that, and it like goes and like eradicates your brain. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the translating from Universe FM to real world is really tough.
To K-Rock,
right? It's like, to K-Rock. Because you could hear a symphony in your head. Like sometimes I hear really complicated arrangements in my head, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? You just like, I try to find the bass note, like I try to find the root note of the chords, and then I'm like, well, I don't know. And I just gave up on it because it's just so frustrating where you're just like, shit, am I like the next, classical composer of our generation, but I just don't know, how to write it,
It's wild, isn't it? Yeah,
but, it's very seldom that I sit and think. Do you ever sit and just like visualize a song in its entirety?
If one randomly pops into my head, then kind of, but not in terms of figuring it out. The one thing I used to do back in the tape days, before Logic hit version 2.5, was like if I was like recording stuff on 4-track when I was an audio engineering student, and you could get 2 hours in the 24-track studio, then it's like, you'd have all like your riffs and your ideas that you're kind of playing around with, so you'd know what they were. Then I'd draw out a big grid with like bar numbers and then listen to the song in my head, and that's how I'd get the arrangement. But it's like I knew what the parts were, if you know what I mean. So here's the riff, okay, yeah, the drums will come in there, and then it's like, well, we need a bass line, I don't know what that is, but it's like, so you kind of, so you'd hear it through in a flow, and then on like track 23 I'd record bar numbers, so just like 1, 2, and then yeah, so that isn't really necessary now,
Sure.
Yeah,
but a lot of the unnecessary rigmarole, it really makes some special products, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Like the clunkiness, like the Mad Max car.
Totally. But I think what you're saying, just that it's like, it's almost that way of just setting yourself up to feel frustrated the whole time. And then then it's also like, I think once you develop that feeling of like trust in the creative process, like this will pop up if it needs to. It'll just turn up.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And once you're like, hey, if you can't remember that melody, maybe it's not that great. Where you're just like, maybe you should just think of another one that's more memorable.
Totally. Oh, goodness. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, actually, when I was working with Björk, there's like a couple of times where she'd come into the studio in the morning and go sit and say, I dreamt a song. And she'd literally just like play it and then sing it. And, so it's kind of interesting. So I think it works for some people. The first producer I worked with full-time in London had perfect pitch. And I just thought all producers were like that. And he'd
something you can learn.
Yeah, and he could like write out, like he'd hear like a whole big crazy free jazz kind of trumpet solo, and he'd write it out by hand and then do a paper edit on a score. And then like we'd stick it together in Pro Tools, and it just seemed perfectly natural at the time. Then you figure out like, oh, that's not really how it works.
Like, it's just like typing. That's amazing. Oh my God.
Kind of wild.
As opposed to, I feel like I have like tortured songs out of myself and string parts, like just like, you're coming with me, it's just like pulled it out with so much energy, where at the end you're just like, I don't know, maybe I should just play folk music. You're just like
and you were saying, Mike, like you're very fluid now with like collaborating with people and bringing in fresh energy. So it's and like you said, like your process of creation is actually very like enjoyable. So is it safe to say that you're not trying to force anything? It's like you really let your own intuition go where it is, and then like invite in the other energy as and when it's needed.
Yeah, because I think I did get to the place where I had a stranglehold on the creativity, where because one of my friends, James Riotto, he's an engineer at Tiny Telephone, and then also producer in his own right, and I think he's building a studio in his house. But anyways, Bay Area guy, but he would engineer for me in those early sessions. And once at lunch, he's like a very forthright guy. He was like, hey, are you having any fun? And I was like, and I was like, fun? No, music is not fun. I'm trying to make something great. And he was just like, I don't know, I've seen a lot of people have a lot of fun. and they made great music too. And I was just like, whatever, man. But then like that kind of like stuck with me. And then that album did not turn out the way I wanted it to. And I was like, maybe the missing element was joy, you know? Because I think that's the one thing you can really hear in music is like, and by joy, I don't mean like laughing and dancing around. I mean like an exaltation of the spirit, you know, that it's like, it's not a means to an end. It is the end itself. Like the creation is what's fun. Because he was like, dude, you're in this place with all this amazing gear and like cool people and like you should enjoy yourself. But I was just like a nervous wreck. I would rent a studio for 10 days and it'd be like album or bust, you know? And it was just, I didn't want to take any breaks. Just when the band would go on a break, I'd work on guitar tones for like the next 3 songs, have them lined up. You know, it was just, I couldn't sleep. My own songs would be playing in my head and I just like couldn't go to sleep. And, yeah, I would just go nuts kind of. And I'm like, I think I thought that was cool, you know?
Yeah.
You know, it was like Radiohead Ben's era where it's like, you gotta go nuts to get the goods. I don't know. I hope you don't, because I like not being nuts.